Few stories from the ancient world have endured as powerfully as the Odyssey, a tale of courage, intelligence, temptation, and the unbreakable desire to return home. Although the epic follows the adventures of the Greek hero Odysseus, its origins begin long before his famous voyage, on the blood-soaked plains outside the mighty city of Troy. For 10 relentless years, the greatest warriors of Greece fought against the Trojans in one of history's most legendary conflicts. Kings from every corner of the Greek world sailed together under the leadership of Agamemnon, determined to reclaim Helen, whose abduction had sparked the war. Among these leaders stood Odysseus, king of Ithaca, a ruler unlike the others. While warriors such as Achilles earned everlasting fame through unmatched strength and battlefield glory, Odysseus became renowned for something equally powerful: his extraordinary intelligence. His sharp mind, patience, and ability to outthink his enemies made him one of the most respected commanders in the Greek alliance. As the war dragged into its 10th year, with neither side able to secure victory, Odysseus conceived a daring plan that would forever change military history. He proposed building an enormous wooden horse, hiding elite Greek soldiers inside it, while the rest of the fleet pretended to sail away. Believing the Greeks had abandoned the war, the Trojans celebrated and pulled the mysterious horse into their city as a symbol of triumph. That night, while Troy slept, Odysseus and his companions emerged from the horse, opened the city gates, and allowed the returning Greek army to storm the city. Troy fell in flames, bringing one of antiquity's greatest wars to a dramatic end. Yet while the other kings dreamed of glorious homecomings, Odysseus unknowingly stood at the beginning of an even greater adventure. His greatest battles were not behind him, but waiting across the endless sea. With Troy destroyed, the Greek fleet prepared to return home after a decade of war. Every sailor longed to embrace family once more, and Odysseus was no different. His thoughts were fixed on Ithaca, the rugged island kingdom he had left behind 10 years earlier. There waited his faithful wife Penelope, and his son Telemachus, who had been only an infant when his father departed for war. Odysseus did not seek new conquests or greater glory. His only wish was to return home. Yet the gods of Greek mythology often shaped the destinies of mortals, rewarding humility while punishing arrogance. During the final stages of the Trojan War, many Greek leaders had offended powerful deities through pride and sacrilege, and the sea god Poseidon would soon become Odysseus's greatest enemy. As the fleet sailed away from the smoking ruins of Troy, fierce storms scattered the ships across unfamiliar waters. What should have been a journey lasting only weeks quickly became a dangerous expedition into lands unknown. Each island held new mysteries, strange peoples, and deadly threats that no Greek sailor had ever imagined. The sea itself seemed determined to prevent Odysseus from reaching home, and every decision he made would test not only his courage, but also his wisdom as a leader responsible for the lives of his men. The first major stop on the voyage brought Odysseus and his crew to the land of the Cicons, a people living near the city of Ismarus. Confident after their victory at Troy, the Greeks launched a swift attack, capturing the settlement and seizing treasure, livestock, and supplies. At first, success appeared complete, but triumph quickly turned into disaster. Odysseus urged his men to leave immediately before enemy reinforcements could arrive. However, intoxicated by victory and greed, many ignored their king's orders. They remained on the shore feasting and celebrating instead of preparing to sail. Their delay proved catastrophic. The surviving Cicons gathered allies from neighboring regions and launched a fierce counterattack. The exhausted Greeks were overwhelmed, suffering heavy casualties before finally escaping to sea. This painful defeat became the first lesson of Odysseus's journey. Victory could disappear in an instant when discipline gave way to arrogance. Leadership alone could not save men unwilling to listen, and the loss weighed heavily upon Odysseus as his reduced fleet continued into unknown waters. Driven onward by powerful winds, the weary sailors eventually reached a peaceful-looking island inhabited by the mysterious Lotus Eaters. Unlike previous enemies, these people offered no weapons or threats. Instead, they welcomed the strangers with kindness and shared the fruit of the lotus plant. Curious, several of Odysseus's men accepted the gift without suspicion. Almost immediately, the fruit erased their desire to return home. They forgot their families, their kingdom, and even the purpose of their voyage, caring only to remain forever among the Lotus Eaters in blissful forgetfulness. Realizing the terrible danger, Odysseus acted decisively. He forcibly dragged his enchanted companions back to the ships, tied them to their benches, and ordered an immediate departure before anyone else could taste the lotus. This episode revealed that not every danger appeared as a monster or a battlefield. Some threats arrived disguised as comfort and pleasure, tempting travelers to abandon their responsibilities and forget who they truly were. Odysseus understood that the greatest obstacle to reaching Ithaca was not merely surviving the journey, but preserving the determination to continue it. Soon afterward, the expedition reached a rugged island, where towering cliffs overlooked hidden caves filled with livestock. Curious about the strange land, Odysseus selected a small group of companions to explore one of the caves, hoping to receive the traditional hospitality expected among ancient Greeks. Instead, they encountered Polyphemus, a gigantic Cyclops and the son of Poseidon himself. When the monstrous shepherd returned, he sealed the cave with an enormous stone, impossible for ordinary men to move. Rather than welcoming his guests, Polyphemus brutally seized several sailors and devoured them alive before the horrified survivors. Faced with certain death, Odysseus relied not on strength, but on intelligence. He offered the giants strong wine, taken from his ship, patiently waiting until Polyphemus became heavily intoxicated. When asked his name, Odysseus cleverly replied, "Nobody." Once the Cyclops fell asleep, the Greeks sharpened a massive wooden stake in the fire and drove it into his single eye, blinding him. As the giants screamed in agony, neighboring Cyclopes rushed to help and shouted, "Who is hurting you?" Polyphemus answered, "Nobody is hurting me," causing the others to believe no real danger existed. The next morning, although blind, the Cyclops blocked the cave entrance while allowing his sheep to leave for pasture. Anticipating this, Odysseus tied each man beneath the woolly bellies of the animals. As the sheep passed outside, the Greeks escaped unnoticed. Safe aboard his ship, Odysseus could not resist one final act of pride. Instead of sailing away silently, he revealed his true name to the furious Cyclops, boasting that Odysseus, king of Ithaca, had defeated him. Enraged, Polyphemus lifted his hands toward the heavens and prayed to his father, Poseidon, begging the sea god to curse the Greek hero. He asked that Odysseus never return home, or if fate allowed his return, that he arrive only after years of suffering, having lost his companions and finding hardship waiting in his own kingdom. Poseidon heard his son's plea, and from that moment forward, the sea itself became Odysseus's relentless enemy. What had begun as a victorious voyage home was transformed into one of the greatest adventures ever told, a journey defined not only by monsters and storms, but by the consequences of pride, the power of wisdom, and the enduring hope of one man determined to find his way back to Ithaca, no matter how impossible the road ahead might become. As the coastline disappeared behind them, Odysseus and his surviving crew had no way of knowing that the greatest danger they faced was no longer the monsters lurking on distant islands, but the wrath of an immortal god. In the world of ancient Greek mythology, the Olympian gods were deeply involved in the lives of mortals. They rewarded acts of piety and punished arrogance with devastating force. By blinding Polyphemus, Odysseus had acted in self-defense, but by proudly revealing his identity afterward, he transformed a clever escape into a personal insult against Poseidon, the mighty ruler of the seas. From that moment onward, every storm, every crashing wave, and every unexpected obstacle seemed guided by the sea god's relentless anger. Odysseus had survived the Cyclops through intelligence, yet even the wisest man could not easily escape divine vengeance. The curse marked a turning point in his journey, transforming what had begun as a difficult voyage home into an epic struggle against fate itself. The tragedy of the Cyclops also revealed one of Odysseus's greatest strengths and one of his greatest flaws. Throughout the Trojan War, his intelligence had repeatedly saved the Greek army. He understood that victory often belonged to those who could outthink an opponent rather than overpower them. His plan involving the Trojan horse had demonstrated this perfectly. Against Polyphemus, he once again relied on strategy instead of brute force, creating one of the most ingenious escapes in ancient literature. Yet his success was immediately overshadowed by pride. Ancient Greek culture admired honor and reputation, and heroes often sought lasting fame through extraordinary deeds. Odysseus wanted the Cyclops to know exactly who had defeated him. That single decision satisfied his pride for only a moment, but condemned him and his companions to years of suffering. The episode became one of the earliest and clearest examples of a timeless lesson. Even the greatest achievements can be undone by a single reckless choice. As the fleet continued across unfamiliar waters, every sailor felt the weight of uncertainty. Their numbers had already been reduced by the disastrous battle against the Cyclones and the horrific encounter with Polyphemus. Supplies were becoming scarcer, morale was beginning to weaken, and fear slowly replaced the confidence that had carried them away from Troy. Nevertheless, Odysseus refused to surrender to despair. He remained determined to guide his remaining men home, despite the growing dangers surrounding them. His leadership, during these difficult moments, became one of the defining qualities of his character. Unlike many legendary warriors who relied solely on physical strength, Odysseus inspired his followers through resilience, careful planning, and an unwavering commitment to survival. Even after devastating losses, he continued searching for solutions rather than giving in to hopelessness. The experiences of these early adventures also established the central themes that would define the rest of the Odyssey. The first was the constant struggle between intelligence and brute force. The Cyclops possessed overwhelming physical power, yet he was defeated by clever thinking. The second theme was the danger of pride. Time and again, the story demonstrated that arrogance invited disaster, whether through the greed of the crew at Ismarus or Odysseus's boast after escaping the Cyclops. Another recurring idea was the importance of self-control. The Lotus Eaters tempted sailors not with violence, but with comfort and forgetfulness, reminding audiences that some of life's greatest dangers appear pleasant rather than terrifying. Above all, the epic emphasized perseverance. No matter how many setbacks Odysseus endured, his determination to return home never disappeared. These adventures also reflected the beliefs of the ancient Greeks about the relationship between humanity and the gods. Mortals possessed courage, intelligence, and ambition, but they could never completely control their destinies. Divine powers could reward virtue, punish pride, or alter the course of an entire lifetime with a single decision. Heroes therefore had to balance confidence with humility, recognizing that success depended not only upon their own abilities, but also upon the favor of the gods. Odysseus would spend much of his journey learning this difficult lesson, discovering that wisdom included knowing when to act boldly and when to respect forces greater than oneself. Beyond the mythical creatures and supernatural events, the Odyssey also explored deeply human emotions that continue to resonate thousands of years later. Odysseus's longing for Ithaca represented more than a desire to return to a physical place. Home symbolized family, identity, peace, and everything worth enduring hardship to protect. Every island he visited offered opportunities to abandon his quest, yet he consistently rejected comfort in favor of duty. This relentless commitment distinguished him from many other legendary heroes. His greatest victory would not be winning another war or conquering another kingdom, but reclaiming the ordinary life that had been stolen from him by conflict and fate. Meanwhile, back in Ithaca, years continued to pass without news of the king. His wife, Penelope, remained faithful, despite growing pressure from powerful noblemen who believed Odysseus had died. His young son, Telemachus, grew into adulthood, knowing his father only through stories told by others. Although Odysseus could not yet know it, the kingdom he desperately sought to reach was slowly changing in his absence. Every additional year at sea made his eventual return more uncertain and more dangerous. His struggle was no longer simply against monsters and storms, but against time itself. The opening chapters of the Odyssey therefore establish far more than an exciting adventure. They introduce a hero whose greatest weapon is his mind, whose greatest weakness is his pride, and whose greatest desire is not glory, but home. They demonstrate that every decision carries consequences, and that true leadership demands sacrifice, discipline, and endurance. As Odysseus sails farther from the familiar world of Greece, he enters a realm where witches, giants, sea monsters, and immortal beings await him. Each challenge will test a different aspect of his character, forcing him to become not only a survivor, but also a wiser and more humble man. Yet the journey has only just begun. Ahead lie the floating island of the wind god Aeolus, the terrifying Lastrygonian giants, the enchantress Circe, the haunting realm of the dead, the irresistible song of the Sirens, the deadly passage between Scylla and Charybdis, and countless other trials that will push Odysseus to the limits of human endurance. Before he can once again stand upon the shores of Ithaca, he must face challenges unlike anything he encountered during the Trojan War. The clever king who left Troy as a victorious commander will return, if he returns at all, as a man transformed by suffering, wisdom, and the unyielding hope that even the longest journey can eventually lead home. After escaping the island of the Cyclops and earning the undying hatred of Poseidon, Odysseus and his exhausted crew continued their desperate search for a route back to Ithaca. The sea stretched endlessly before them, concealing both hope and unimaginable danger beneath its shimmering surface. Every sunrise brought the promise of progress, yet every sunset reminded the sailors that home remained frustratingly out of reach. The confidence they had once possessed after the fall of Troy had been replaced by caution, grief, and uncertainty. They had already lost many companions, and each new island seemed to hide another deadly trial. Unknown to the weary Greeks, their next encounter would offer them the closest opportunity yet to return home, only for that chance to be destroyed not by monsters or gods, but by human curiosity and mistrust. After many days at sea, the fleet arrived at the floating island of Aeolus, the divine keeper of the winds. Unlike the savage Cyclops, Aeolus welcomed Odysseus with generosity and hospitality. For an entire month, the ruler of the winds listened with fascination as the Greek king recounted the story of the Trojan War, the destruction of Troy, and the terrifying adventures that had already unfolded during his voyage. Impressed by Odysseus's intelligence and perseverance, Aeolus decided to help him complete his journey home. Before the Greeks departed, the wind god presented Odysseus with an extraordinary gift. He trapped every dangerous wind inside a tightly sealed leather bag, leaving only the gentle west wind free to guide the ship safely toward Ithaca. It was one of the greatest blessings Odysseus would ever receive, placing his homeland within reach after years of suffering. For 9 continuous days, the favorable wind carried the fleet steadily across the sea. At last, the mountains of Ithaca appeared on the horizon. Some sailors could even see smoke rising from distant villages, while Odysseus himself recognized the familiar coastline of the kingdom he had not seen for nearly 20 years. Overcome by exhaustion after steering the ship without rest for days, he finally closed his eyes and fell into a deep sleep. His faithful leadership had brought them almost to safety, but while their captain slept, suspicion spread among the crew. They began whispering that Aeolus' mysterious leather bag must contain unimaginable riches, perhaps gold, silver, or priceless treasures that Odysseus intended to keep for himself. Consumed by greed and jealousy, they ignored the warnings of their king. Believing they deserved a share of the supposed treasure, they untied the bag. Instantly, the imprisoned winds burst free with unimaginable violence. Hurricanes roared across the sea, waves towered above the ships, and the peaceful waters transformed into chaos. Instead of reaching the shores of Ithaca, the fleet was hurled backward across the sea, driven hundreds of miles away from home in a matter of hours. When Odysseus awoke and realized what had happened, despair nearly overwhelmed him. Years of hardship had almost come to an end, only to be undone by a single act of mistrust. His companions had defeated themselves. No enemy had attacked them. No god had intervened. Their own lack of discipline had destroyed the greatest opportunity they would ever receive. With little choice, Odysseus returned to the island of Aeolus and begged the wind god for help once more. However, Aeolus refused. Believing that no mortal cursed by the gods should receive divine assistance, he concluded that Odysseus's terrible misfortunes could only be the result of heavenly punishment. Fearing the anger of the Olympians, Aeolus ordered the Greeks to leave immediately. For Odysseus, the rejection was devastating. The last clear path home had vanished forever, and the journey once again led into the unknown. The fleet sailed onward until they reached the land of the Laestrygonians, a mysterious people who at first appeared peaceful. Their harbor seemed perfectly sheltered, surrounded by towering cliffs that offered protection from storms. Most of the Greek ships entered the narrow bay, believing they had found a safe anchorage. Odysseus, however, remained cautious. Trusting his instincts, he anchored his own vessel outside the harbor entrance, prepared to flee if necessary. His caution would soon save his life. The apparent peace quickly shattered. The Laestrygonians revealed themselves as gigantic cannibals of immense strength. They hurled enormous boulders down from the cliffs, crushing ships like fragile toys. Those sailors who survived the falling rocks were seized by the giants, who devoured them without mercy. Panic spread throughout the harbor, as trapped vessels collided with one another, unable to escape the narrow entrance. Within minutes, nearly the entire Greek fleet had been destroyed. Only Odysseus's ship, anchored safely outside the harbor, managed to cut its ropes and flee into open water. The disaster marked one of the darkest moments of the entire voyage. Dozens of ships that had sailed proudly from Troy were now gone forever. Thousands of warriors had perished, leaving only a single battered vessel to continue the journey. Reduced to one ship and a small band of survivors, Odysseus pressed onward until he reached the enchanted island of Aea, home of the powerful sorceress Circe. Unlike previous islands, this place appeared strangely beautiful. Dense forests surrounded an elegant palace where wild lions and wolves wandered peacefully without threatening visitors. The unusual behavior of the animals hinted that powerful magic was at work. Curious about the mysterious palace, Odysseus divided his remaining crew into two groups. One party, led by his trusted companion Eurylochus, approached the magnificent hall, while Odysseus remained behind with the others. Circe greeted the explorers with warmth and invited them to share a magnificent feast. Yet hidden within the food and wine was a powerful enchantment. As soon as the sailors finished eating, the sorceress touched them with her magical wand. Before their horrified companions' eyes, the men were transformed into pigs. Although their bodies had become those of animals, their human minds remained trapped inside, fully aware of their terrible fate. Circe herded them into pens like ordinary livestock, leaving them helpless prisoners of her magic. Only Eurylochus, who had grown suspicious before entering the palace, escaped the enchantment and raced back to warn Odysseus of the horrifying transformation. Without hesitation, Odysseus prepared to rescue his companions. even though he knew he was about to confront one of the most powerful magical beings in the world. On the lonely path leading towards Circe's palace, however, an unexpected figure appeared before him. It was Hermes, the swift messenger of the gods, who had taken pity on the struggling hero. Hermes handed Odysseus a sacred herb known as moly, a rare plant whose divine properties could protect a mortal from even the strongest enchantments. He instructed Odysseus to consume the herb before entering Circe's hall, and explained exactly how to overcome the sorceress when she attempted to cast her spell. Armed not with superior strength, but with divine wisdom and preparation, Odysseus continued toward the palace, ready to face another challenge that would test his courage, intelligence, and determination to save the few companions he still had left. Protected by the sacred herb given to him by Hermes, Odysseus entered Circe's magnificent palace with confidence. Just as the messenger of the gods had predicted, the enchantress welcomed him warmly and offered him food and wine mixed with a powerful magical potion. When Odysseus finished the meal, Circe touched him with her golden wand and spoke the words of transformation that had turned his companions into pigs. To her astonishment, nothing happened. The magic failed completely. Before the surprised sorceress could react, Odysseus drew his bronze sword and confronted her. Realizing she faced a hero protected by divine power, Circe abandoned her hostility and begged for mercy. She swore an oath not to harm him or his companions again, and immediately restored the transformed sailors to their human forms. More remarkably, the spell left them younger, healthier, and stronger than before. What had begun as another deadly encounter gradually became an unexpected alliance. Odysseus and his remaining crew stayed on the island of Aiaia for nearly a full year. After so many months of hardship, Circe's palace offered warmth, food, comfort, and safety. Yet even in this peaceful refuge, the king of Ithaca could not forget his true purpose. While many of his exhausted companions wished to remain, Odysseus knew that every day spent on the island delayed his return to Penelope and Telemachus. Eventually, he asked Circe how he could finally reach home. Her answer surprised him. Before continuing his voyage, he would first have to undertake one of the most terrifying journeys imaginable, the journey into the underworld itself. There, he must seek the spirit of the blind prophet Tiresias, whose wisdom alone could reveal the path that lay ahead. Following Circe's instructions, Odysseus sailed to the distant edge of the world, where the rivers of the living met the kingdom of the dead. There he performed sacred rituals and poured offerings of milk, honey, wine, and blood into the earth, summoning the spirits of those who had passed beyond life. Soon countless shadows emerged from the darkness, gathering around the sacrifice. Among the first was the ghost of Elpenor, one of Odysseus's own sailors, who had accidentally died on Circe's island after falling from a rooftop. He begged his captain to return later and give him a proper burial so that his soul could finally find peace. The request reminded Odysseus that even amid legendary adventures, the bonds of friendship and duty remained sacred. At last, the prophet Tiresias appeared. Drinking from the sacrificial blood, he regained the ability to speak with the wisdom he had possessed in life. Tiresias confirmed that Poseidon's anger would continue to haunt Odysseus's voyage, but assured him that reaching Ithaca remained possible if he and his crew exercised discipline. He warned them above all never to harm the sacred cattle belonging to Helios, the sun god. If they respected this command, some hope of survival remained. If they failed, disaster would be inevitable. Tiresias also foretold that even after returning home, Odysseus would face violence in his own palace before finally restoring peace to his kingdom. The prophecy offered hope, but it also made clear that many hardships still awaited. While in the underworld, Odysseus encountered the spirits of many famous figures from the Trojan War and his own past. Most heartbreaking was his reunion with his mother, Anticlea, who had died during his long absence. She explained that grief and longing for her missing son had slowly consumed her until she could endure no longer. Odysseus desperately tried 3 times to embrace her, but each attempt passed through her shadow-like form. The encounter reminded him that time had continued to move forward while he wandered the seas. His family had suffered just as deeply as he had. He also met the spirits of Agamemnon, Achilles, and Ajax, each revealing painful truths about glory, mortality, and the heavy cost of war. Achilles, once the greatest warrior among the Greeks, confessed that he would rather live as a poor farmer than rule over all the dead, a powerful reminder that life itself was more valuable than everlasting fame. After returning to Circe's island to bury Elpenor and prepare for the next stage of the voyage, Odysseus received further warnings about the deadly obstacles ahead. The first danger would come from the Sirens, mysterious creatures whose enchanting songs lured sailors toward destruction. Their voices promised perfect knowledge and irresistible beauty, causing passing ships to crash upon hidden rocks. Circe advised Odysseus to seal his sailors' ears with beeswax so they could not hear the deadly music. However, knowing his own endless curiosity, Odysseus chose a different path. He ordered his crew to tie him tightly to the ship's mast and instructed them not to release him under any circumstances, no matter how desperately he begged. As the ship approached the Sirens' island, an unearthly melody drifted across the calm sea. The voices were unlike anything Odysseus had ever heard, beautiful, haunting, and impossible to resist. They promised wisdom beyond imagination and claimed they knew every secret of the world. Overcome by the irresistible temptation, Odysseus struggled violently against the ropes, shouting for his men to untie him immediately. But the sailors, their ears protected by wax, heard nothing except his muffled cries. They tightened the ropes even further and continued rowing until the deadly song finally faded into the distance. Once again, discipline and careful preparation had saved the expedition. No sooner had they escaped the Sirens than an even greater challenge awaited them. Ahead lay a narrow strait where 2 horrors guarded opposite sides. On one side lurked Charybdis, a monstrous whirlpool capable of swallowing an entire ship beneath the sea. On the other dwelled Scylla, a terrifying creature with 6 long necks and 6 ravenous heads, each capable of snatching a sailor from the deck in an instant. Circe had explained that there was no perfect solution. To avoid Charybdis meant sailing close enough for Scylla to attack. To avoid Scylla risked losing the entire ship to the whirlpool. Forced to choose the lesser evil, Odysseus guided his vessel closer to Scylla's rocky cave. As the sailors rowed with all their strength, the monster struck. 6 screaming companions were seized and devoured before the horrified eyes of the survivors. Though the loss was heartbreaking, the ship escaped complete destruction. Eventually, battered by storms and exhausted from constant danger, the crew reached the island of Thrinacia, where the sacred cattle of Helios grazed peacefully. Odysseus immediately remembered Tiresias's warning and ordered his men not to touch the divine animals under any circumstances. At first they obeyed, but fierce storms trapped the ship on the island for many days. Their food supplies ran out, hunger became unbearable, and desperation spread throughout the camp. While Odysseus prayed alone for guidance, the crew, led by Eurylochus, made a fatal decision. Believing death by starvation worse than divine punishment, they slaughtered several of Helios's sacred cattle and held a feast. When Helios discovered the sacrilege, he demanded justice from Zeus himself. The king of the gods agreed. As soon as the Greeks returned to sea, Zeus unleashed a thunderstorm of unimaginable fury. A massive lightning bolt struck the ship, shattering it into pieces. Every member of the crew was thrown into the raging sea and drowned. Only Odysseus survived, clinging to broken timbers as the waves carried him helplessly across the ocean. The prophecy of Tiresias had come true, exactly as foretold. Because his companions had ignored the warning of the gods, every one of them perished. Now utterly alone for the first time since leaving Troy, Odysseus drifted across the endless sea with no ship, no crew, and little hope of survival. The proud commander who had once led hundreds of warriors had become a solitary castaway, kept alive only by determination and fate. Yet even after losing everything, he refused to surrender. Ahead lay one final series of trials before he could ever hope to see the shores of Ithaca again. His greatest test was still to come, proving that the strongest weapon a hero could possess was not a sword or shield, but the unwavering resolve to continue when all seemed lost. Alone upon the endless sea, surrounded by nothing but broken pieces of his shattered ship, Odysseus had reached the lowest point of his remarkable journey. Every companion who had sailed with him from Troy was gone. The brave warriors who had survived 10 years of war had ultimately been defeated, not by enemy armies, but by divine wrath, human weakness, and the unforgiving power of the sea. For days, Odysseus drifted across the waves, sustained only by his determination to survive. The storms sent by Zeus gradually subsided, and the currents carried the exhausted hero toward an island unlike any he had visited before. This was Ogygia, a hidden paradise far removed from the world of ordinary mortals. Lush forests covered the hills, crystal-clear springs flowed through flowering meadows, and birds filled the air with beautiful songs. Yet beneath its breathtaking beauty lay another form of imprisonment. The island was home to the immortal nymph Calypso, a being of extraordinary beauty and divine power. When she discovered the half-conscious Odysseus washed upon her shore, she rescued him, cared for his wounds, and welcomed him into her magnificent home. Unlike the monsters and enemies he had faced during his voyage, Calypso treated him with kindness and affection. As the years passed, she fell deeply in love with the weary king of Ithaca, and begged him to remain with her forever. She promised him a life free from pain, suffering, old age, and even death itself. If he accepted her offer, he would become immortal and spend eternity beside a goddess in paradise. For many people, such an offer would have been impossible to refuse. Endless youth, eternal life, and unimaginable comfort represented everything human beings had ever desired. Yet Odysseus possessed a different dream. Despite Calypso's beauty and generosity, his heart remained with Penelope and Ithaca. Every day he walked to the rocky shoreline, gazing across the sea and wondering whether he would ever again see his homeland. He wept not because he lacked comfort, but because he lacked freedom. Home was more than a place, it was his identity, his family, and the life he had chosen. No amount of divine luxury could replace the simple happiness of returning to those he loved. For 7 long years, Odysseus remained trapped on Ogygia. Meanwhile, events in the mortal world continued to unfold. In Ithaca, his absence had lasted nearly 20 years. 10 years fighting at Troy, and almost 10 more wandering across the seas. Many believed the king had died long ago. Powerful nobles from neighboring regions gathered inside his palace, each hoping to marry Queen Penelope and claim the throne for himself. These men, known as the suitors, consumed Odysseus's wealth, feasted daily in his halls, and treated his household as though it already belonged to them. They mocked the young prince Telemachus, believing he lacked the strength to defend his father's kingdom. Penelope, however, refused to surrender hope. Though pressured constantly to choose a new husband, she delayed the suitors with remarkable intelligence. She announced that she would make her decision only after finishing a funeral shroud for Odysseus's elderly father, Laertes. Every day she worked diligently at her loom, but each night she secretly unraveled everything she had woven during daylight. For 3 years she successfully deceived the suitors, until one of her servants revealed the truth. Even then, Penelope continued searching for ways to postpone the unwanted marriage, remaining faithful despite the growing dangers surrounding her family. The suffering of Odysseus eventually caught the attention of the goddess Athena. who had admired his wisdom and courage since the Trojan War. Unlike Poseidon, Athena remained one of his greatest protectors. She appealed to Zeus, arguing that enough time had passed and that the hero deserved the chance to return home. Zeus agreed. He dispatched Hermes, the swift messenger of the gods, to Ogygia with a divine command. Calypso was ordered to release her captive and allow him to continue his journey. Although heartbroken, Calypso obeyed the command of Zeus. She helped Odysseus gather timber, build a sturdy raft, and prepare supplies for the voyage ahead. Before he departed, she provided clothing, food, fresh water, and favorable advice, demonstrating that her love for him remained genuine despite his decision to leave. At last, after 7 years of captivity, Odysseus once again sailed into the open sea, driven by renewed hope that Ithaca might finally be within reach. But Poseidon had not forgotten the insult against his son Polyphemus. Returning from a distant land, the sea gods spotted Odysseus alone upon the waves, and immediately unleashed another devastating storm. Towering waves smashed against the fragile raft. Hurricane-force winds tore apart its wooden frame, and the exhausted hero was thrown into the sea once again. For 2 days and 2 nights he struggled against the relentless current, barely managing to stay alive. Only the intervention of the sea goddess Ino, who provided him with a magical veil that protected him from drowning, allowed him to survive the terrible tempest. Finally, battered and exhausted, Odysseus reached the shores of Scheria, the homeland of the Phaeacians. Too weak to continue, he collapsed beneath a pile of leaves near a riverbank and fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, Princess Nausicaa, daughter of King Alcinous, arrived at the river with her attendants to wash clothing. While the other young women fled in fear at the sight of the ragged stranger emerging from the bushes, Nausicaa remained calm. Odysseus approached her respectfully, carefully choosing words that displayed both humility and wisdom. Impressed by his noble character despite his miserable appearance, the princess offered him food, clothing, and directions to her father's palace. The Phaeacians were famous throughout the Greek world for their unmatched hospitality and extraordinary skill as sailors. King Alcinous welcomed the mysterious stranger without asking his identity, honoring the sacred tradition of offering food and shelter before questioning a guest. During a magnificent feast, the royal bard began singing songs about the Trojan War. Hearing memories of old friends and fallen heroes, Odysseus quietly covered his face as tears filled his eyes. His emotional reaction did not escape the notice of King Alcinous, who gently asked the stranger to reveal who he truly was and explain why the songs of Troy caused him such sorrow. For the first time since leaving Calypso's island, Odysseus openly declared his identity. He introduced himself as the King of Ithaca, and began recounting the incredible adventures that had kept him away from home for nearly 10 years. He described the Cyclones, the Lotus Eaters, the Cyclops, Aeolus, the Laestrygonians, Circe, the underworld, the Sirens, Scylla and Charybdis, and the destruction of his crew after they slaughtered the sacred cattle of Helios. The Phaeacians listened in amazement, realizing they were hosting one of the greatest heroes of the age. Deeply moved by his story, King Alcinous made a solemn promise. Unlike every previous attempt, this voyage would succeed. The Phaeacians possessed magical ships guided almost by thought alone, capable of crossing the sea faster than any ordinary vessel. At last, after 20 years of war, wandering, and suffering, Odysseus would finally return to the shores of Ithaca. His long journey across the known world was almost over, but his greatest challenge awaited him not on the sea, but within his own home. As the sun disappeared beneath the western horizon, the enchanted ship of the Phaeacians glided silently across the calm waters of the Ionian Sea. Unlike ordinary vessels, it required no experienced navigator, for the magical ship understood the wishes of its passengers. While Odysseus slept peacefully after recounting the hardships of his long journey, the vessel carried him steadily toward the rugged shores of Ithaca. Before dawn, the sailors gently lifted the sleeping hero onto the beach, placing beside him the magnificent treasures that King Alcinous had generously bestowed upon him. Without waking him, they quietly departed, leaving Odysseus alone on the island he had not seen for 20 years. When he finally opened his eyes, he did not immediately recognize his homeland. So many years had passed that even the familiar coastline seemed strange. At that moment, the goddess Athena appeared before him in disguise. Revealing her true identity, she welcomed him home and explained the dangerous situation that awaited him. His palace had been overrun by arrogant suitors who believed him dead, consumed his wealth, insulted his family, and plotted to murder his son, Telemachus. Athena warned that strength alone would not defeat such enemies. Once again, wisdom, patience, and careful planning would become Odysseus's greatest weapons. To conceal his identity, Athena transformed the heroic king into the appearance of an old beggar. His handsome features disappeared beneath wrinkles, his clothing became worn and ragged, and his once proud appearance was replaced by that of a poor wanderer. This disguise would allow him to move through his own kingdom unnoticed, discovering which servants remained loyal and which had betrayed their rightful king. Odysseus first sought refuge with his faithful swineherd, Eumaeus, whose humble farm lay beyond the palace. Despite believing his master long dead, Eumaeus welcomed the old stranger with generosity, offering food, shelter, and kindness without expecting anything in return. His unwavering loyalty revealed that not everyone in Ithaca had forgotten their king. Soon afterward, Athena guided Telemachus safely home from his own journey in search of news about his father. Father and son met for the first time since the Trojan War, though Telemachus initially failed to recognize the disguised beggar standing before him. When Athena lifted the magical disguise for a brief moment, revealing Odysseus in his true form, disbelief gave way to overwhelming joy. The two embraced after 20 years of separation, sharing tears of happiness and grief for the years they had lost. Yet there was little time for celebration. Together they carefully planned the liberation of their home. Knowing they were vastly outnumbered, they relied not on reckless courage, but on secrecy and strategy. Every detail had to be perfect if they hoped to survive. Disguised once again as a beggar, Odysseus entered his own palace, where none of the suitors recognized the rightful king standing among them. The sight before him filled him with controlled anger. The once proud halls of Ithaca echoed with drunken laughter, as the suitors feasted upon his livestock, drank his finest wine, and mocked the traditions of hospitality that the Greeks held sacred. Some insulted the old beggar, throwing scraps of food and hurling cruel words without realizing they were humiliating the very man whose kingdom they sought to steal. Odysseus endured every insult in silence, demonstrating extraordinary self-control. He observed carefully, identifying loyal servants while exposing those who had betrayed his family. Even his faithful old dog, Argos, recognized him immediately despite the disguise. Neglected and lying near the palace gates, the aged hound wagged his tail one final time before peacefully dying, having lived just long enough to see his beloved master return. It was one of the most touching reunions in the entire epic. Inside the palace, Queen Penelope continued resisting the relentless pressure to choose a new husband. Although grief had aged her, her intelligence remained as sharp as ever. To delay the decision one final time, she announced a contest unlike any other. She brought forth the great bow of Odysseus, a weapon so powerful that none but its owner had ever successfully strung it. She declared that whoever could string the bow and shoot an arrow cleanly through 12 aligned axe heads would become her husband. One by one the proud suitors attempted the challenge. Despite their boasts, none possessed the strength or skill required even to bend the mighty bow. Their repeated failures exposed the difference between arrogant ambition and true heroism. Then the old beggar stepped forward, and calmly requested permission to try. The suitors burst into laughter, mocking the frail stranger who dared attempt what none of them could accomplish. Reluctantly, Penelope allowed the attempt. Odysseus lifted the familiar bow with practiced ease, examined it lovingly, and strung it effortlessly, producing the clear musical twang that had once echoed across the battlefields of Troy. Silence filled the great hall. Taking a single arrow, he aimed carefully and sent it flying through all 12 axe heads without the slightest deviation. At that instant, Athena removed the final traces of his disguise. Standing tall before his enemies, Odysseus declared his true identity. The laughter instantly vanished, replaced by terror. The battle that followed became one of the most dramatic scenes in all of Greek literature. Armed with his legendary bow, Odysseus struck down the leader of the suitors before anyone could react. Telemachus, Eumaeus, and the loyal cowherd Philoetius secured the doors, trapping the invaders inside the palace. The suitors desperately searched for weapons, only to discover that Telemachus had secretly removed most of them beforehand. Chaos erupted as arrows flew across the hall. Athena herself watched over the battle, occasionally deflecting enemy spears and strengthening the courage of the defenders. One by one the suitors fell beneath the combined skill of the rightful king and his loyal companions. Those servants who had betrayed the royal household also faced justice for their treachery. By the end of the struggle, the palace had been reclaimed, and the long years of humiliation were finally over. Yet one final reunion remained. Penelope had waited faithfully for 2 decades, but caution prevented her from immediately accepting the man who claimed to be her husband. She had heard stories of gods and impostors assuming human forms, and she needed absolute proof. Calmly, she ordered her servants to move the marriage bed from the royal chamber. Odysseus immediately protested, explaining that such a thing was impossible, because he himself had carved the bed from the trunk of a living olive tree rooted deep within the palace floor. The chamber had been built around the tree, making the bed immovable. Hearing this secret, known only to the 2 of them, Penelope finally knew the truth. She rushed into her husband's arms, and after 20 years of separation, the king and queen of Ithaca were reunited. The story did not end with the death of the suitors. Their families, furious over the loss of their sons, gathered an armed force and marched against Odysseus, seeking revenge. Civil war threatened to engulf Ithaca just as peace had finally returned. Before another bloody conflict could begin, Athena descended once more, acting on the command of Zeus. She ordered both sides to lay down their weapons and forget the bitterness of the past. Recognizing the will of the gods, the people obeyed. Peace was restored, and Odysseus finally reclaimed not only his throne, but also the stability of his kingdom. The conclusion of the Odyssey is far more than the ending of an adventure. It is the fulfillment of a timeless human dream, the longing to return home after years of hardship. Throughout his journey, Odysseus defeated monsters, outwitted giants, resisted irresistible temptations, survived shipwrecks, journeyed into the realm of the dead, and endured the anger of the gods themselves. Yet none of these victories mattered more than the moment he embraced his family once again. His story reminds us that true heroism is measured not only by strength in battle, but also by wisdom, perseverance, loyalty, and the courage to continue despite overwhelming adversity. More than 2,700 years after it was first composed, the Odyssey continues to inspire readers across the world. It has shaped literature, influenced countless films and novels, and become one of the foundations of Western storytelling. Its themes of resilience, identity, justice, temptation, sacrifice, and the enduring meaning of home remain as relevant today as they were in the age of ancient Greece. The voyage of Odysseus is ultimately the story of humanity itself, a reminder that life's greatest journeys are not measured by the distance traveled, but by the wisdom gained along the way, and that after every storm, every loss, and every seemingly impossible trial, hope can still guide us safely home.